Hello, 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 and welcome to our panel discussion on greener, more efficient streaming. In these next 45 minutes, we'll be looking at the key topics in streaming technologies that minimize energy consumption, while also optimizing content delivery efficiency. This is an important topic that we see in almost every single RFQ issued by network service providers, pay TV operators around the globe in these times. Why? Because they have to strengthen their sustainability and work on reducing their carbon footprint. In this panel, we'll focus on CDN-related technologies, since this is typically the biggest energy consumer in content delivery. But we'll not stop there. We'll also look at how to gather insights to make the right decisions. We'll look at what are the best architectures to get there. And we'll also tackle upstream technologies. My name is 𝗚𝗵𝗵𝗶𝗵𝗺, and I'm excited to be your host and moderator of this panel today. In my day job, I'm connecting the dots and connecting people. That means I'm advising thought leaders, leading operators, and leading vendors on innovation topics and go-to-market strategy. Okay, let's get started here. Let me introduce you to our fantastic panelists. We have Brian Stevenson. He's technical fellow at the Streaming Video Technology Alliance. There was a name change. It's not the SVA anymore, it's SVTA. Hi, Brian. And we have Jon Anderson. He's CDN product manager at Velocix. Good morning to the East Coast of the US. Hello.
Hey, good morning.
Good morning.
Great to see you. Let's start with a little introduction. So please tell the audience a bit about yourself and your role at your company. And Brian, do you want to start first?
Absolutely. Thank you, Andy, and good morning. So as Andy said, my name is Brian Stevenson. I'm one of the 2 technical fellows at the Streaming Video Technology Alliance. My primary focus there is really on new caching and CDN technologies, network and transportation optimization, and really immersive video and XR. So looking at, it's quite an exciting space, really looking at this convergence between video and mesh technologies. And for you, those of you who don't know about the SVTA, we're effectively an industry group. We're formed by content owners, infrastructure providers, and vendors. And we really put together sort of best practices around sort of efficiency, QoE for streaming. And we take those to organizations like the ITF and work with the ITF really to standardize these new technologies and these new implementations that we're defining.
Thank you, Brian. Great. Thanks for the introduction and also for an overview of the SVTA. And Jon, please, a few words about you, your role, and Velocix.
Sure. Hey, glad to be here, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Jon Anderson. I'm the product manager for CDN, CDN Broker, and our personalization platforms at Velocix. As Andy mentioned, I'm located out of Atlanta, Georgia, and I have a background coming from a number of technology vendors in the video streaming space. As it relates to Velocix, we're a leading provider as a technology provider in the streaming video space with a focus on CDN, origin, ad tech, recording solutions, and we work with a number of the largest providers in the world.
Perfect. So thank you for that introduction. So let's give some context to the audience. We're talking about greener, more efficient streaming. Maybe, Jon, from your experience and from the talks with some of these leading vendors that you just mentioned, can you give us some statistics about the actual energy emissions as it relates to video delivery? Where do we stand? Do you have some data for us?
Sure. There's a lot of ways of looking at the data across this area, but what we do know is that video streaming is one of many contributors to global warming, and the trend in video streaming continues to rise. So as a data point, a study was done last year by the Carbon Trust that indicated, streaming an hour in the home is equivalent approximately to the emissions you would see from driving a car 200 meters. When we break that down, we see that the bulk of those emissions actually happen with the TV in the home. But we do have to look at the entire delivery infrastructure and make sure that we're doing what we can to save emissions wherever we can. And so there is a role to play for vendors in the video technology industry to make sure that we're doing everything we can to reduce overall emissions.
Okay. And is that already perceived, that need, by the operators you're talking to? So is that, like I said, we see it in many RFQs. So
yes,
how urgent is it for them to really move?
Well, we're seeing significant interest across the board from operators, but primarily in Europe, we're seeing RFPs, and RFQs come with sustainability requirements. And as we look at the energy crisis that the world is dealing with, we're also getting a lot of pressure for cost reduction requirements as it relates to energy consumption and use of our resources that are similar to sustainability requirements. So I think there's an overlap happening in the industry between how operators or customers are buying and how they want to cut costs that actually will lead us to sustainability. We're seeing operators adopt some of the UN's sustainability development goals. Like we said, those RFPs, RFQs, and procurement processes are forcing vendors in this space to identify the initiatives they're taking to deliver a greener business operation.
Okay, so it's cost reduction on one side. It's efficiency. Is there also an element of regulation that is there or might come?
Yes, regulations are coming out of some countries, but there's certainly pressure to align with those regulations and those requirements, even if regulations aren't present. So yes, it is emerging throughout the globe.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jon. Brian, from the perspective of the Streaming Video Technology Alliance, do you also see the pressure to move more towards sustainable solutions?
No, we definitely do, and certainly a number of the customers that we work with, they're really trying to be more sort of, maintain good social standings, so be more socially conspicuous or socially conscious, I guess, if you will. There's even indexes, so if you look at the S&P ESG index, which is the environmental, social, and governance indexes, a lot of companies, it's sort of today, it's really a prestige thing to be in that. And a lot of the companies within the SVA, really their goal is to be listed within that index. I think today, the criteria for getting in that index is somewhat subjective, as governments, I think, as indexes, and as companies that rank other companies like Dun & Bradstreet begin to put key performance indicators in place, that will actually become more and more important. So I think, eventually, really, your market, your company, and the whole ecosystems that you're actually providing will be defined more by this sort of socially conscious environment and these KPIs that are now being put in place.
Okay. Do you also see most of the demand coming from Europe, or is there also pocket of interest in North America, Southern America, or Asia? If you were to draw a heat map, where is the heat the highest?
Yeah, so I think we're definitely seeing it coming from all over. Certainly North America and Europe. I think there's most interest there. South America, there is definitely some interest. And I think when you begin to look at sort of Southeast Asia, there's definitely a lot of interest, and obviously places like Australia, New Zealand, et cetera. So within the SVA itself, or within our member companies, there is definitely a drive. And, as we work through things like, scalability and quality of experience for the end user, those are real tangible benefits that we're trying to give our member companies. But really, one of the intangible benefits that we're seeing coming out of this is, the more that you sort of push for scalability, the more that you improve the quality of experience, the more that you optimize those caches and those networks, one of the intangible benefits is really this greening of the ecosystem. And again, it's not something that we started out to specifically do, but we're definitely seeing that as sort of a side effect of the work that we're doing. And going forward in the future, that's really going to be one of our big focuses.
Okay. Great. So there is demand. There are things to be optimized. Let's talk about how can we even just measure them, because without knowing what is the size of the problem, we don't know what are the effects of any measures to do. So let's talk about analytics a bit. And how do we do that? Where are we? Where are we on the move to greener streaming, and specifically on the aspect of analytics? Jon, maybe.
Sure.
What's your take about what is Velocix's contribution to analytics there?
Absolutely. So, if you want to improve on anything, you start by measuring it, and then you can take informed, actionable decisions based upon that. And so when we look at streaming analytics, it allows us to look at the performance of a CDN, a video network, and begin taking steps towards tuning it for efficiency. When we step back and analyze the system, we can identify traffic patterns, we can look at the network behavior, and optimize the system as a result. So through Velocix, we have an analytics platform that is deployable from our system. And from that system, we can deploy dashboards that have relevant data, giving us that actual intelligence that allows us to look at things like energy consumption across the video network, or how to utilize the most efficient resources in our delivery path. At the end of the day, there's this balance that we want to measure in analytics around, over provisioning capacity versus maximizing the use of resources. And whenever we over provision, you end up with a certain amount of waste in the deployment structure. So analytics gives us a good view as to when to build up a deployment, how to use other avenues that we'll talk about as we go through the conversation today. But it really is important for us to understand the capacity, the efficiency of the network, and how we can optimize those resources.
Yeah, absolutely. Brian, anything to add from your side?
Yeah, so absolutely. So I think, as Jon says, there are really two parts to the analytics puzzle. I'd actually like to add a third part if we could. So there's really the collection piece. And that collection piece, at least within the SVA, we're really focusing at collecting data from all parts within the ecosystem. So pulling player data, pulling data off the network, pulling data off the caches, and then taking that information and really running analytics on that information as a whole, instead of taking each one of those silos as something that's separate. And so what we're really seeing when we take sort of client network data and put it together, we're really getting this 1 + 1 = 3 view of the network and really what's happening in there. The second part is really intelligence. So being able to take that data and being able to make sense of it and being able to know where the waste is, being able to sort of address that, and really using that data to kind of improve the caching, to improve the network, to improve the content delivery, and optimize that really as best as we can. And then sort of the third piece, it's really fairly new, but effectively, when you begin to look at networks like 5G is really being designed to be self-optimizing. So being able to take this output, this intelligence output, bring that back to the network and have the network optimize itself. And so control in the network then shifts really from kind of reactive to proactive. So the network understands what's happening and it can actually make those changes and become more efficient as it really retrieves these analytics and learns what's happening within the ecosystem.
Okay, so definitely a lot of analytics going on, you said, the player, the network, and the caches, and some of the things we come back, hopefully, in the course of this panel. Let's move on. So we're not doing this just for one CDN, because operators often today are employing multiple CDNs, so that's what we call multi-CDN. So how can multi-CDN deployments contribute from this greater efficiency and lower emissions? Wouldn't more CDNs mean more energy consumptions? How does that work, Jon?
So with multiple CDNs, you can optimize your utilization patterns and planning for peak capacity by, instead of overbuilding a single CDN where you have a lot of idle usage, you can spread that load across multiple CDNs and really optimize the use of those multiple resources and avoid some of the overbuild and the waste that goes into a deployment scenario. And so multi-CDN is a key topic. And when we look at multi-CDN from a Velocix perspective, we have our CDN broker application, which allows us to do intelligent routing across multi-CDN environments based upon business rules that can be tied to ecological data, but also based upon or energy consumption and usage, but also be based on content type, cost of delivery, or any number of other business drivers that allow us, an operator to make use of their multi-CDN environment efficiently.
Okay. Isn't managing multiple CDNs, you mentioned your CDN broker, isn't that a complex thing? I would imagine that in order to really save efficient energy, I would need to switch off and spin down some instances and bring it up at the right time. So how complex is that, managing a multi-CDN network?
Yeah, so I do think that some of those criteria and decisions are a bit complex, and it really depends upon advanced data analytics as well as request routing operations that are key to those types of scenarios. And along with multi-CDN, where you have your core on-network CDN, such as what we offer, and then you have perhaps an overflow to a public CDN. That's one scenario. Another scenario we look at is related to hybrid cloud. And hybrid cloud is a little bit different in that we are looking at the resource utilization of the on-premise kind of always-on caches that are built to deal with the daily usage patterns that an operator would expect. And then having cloud available caches that are spun up and spun down based upon demand and peak usage, like around the World Cup or other viewing patterns that might drive that level of utilization. And so, whether it's multi-CDN or this concept of hybrid cloud, both of those really require advanced data analytics and operations that support request routing across those either CDN selection or delivery decisions that have to be made.
Okay. So you mentioned the public clouds and public delivery CDNs. So that brings us, I think, open caching is a topic that is also being discussed multiple times. Brian, the SVTA is obviously a major supporter of open caching. So how important do you see it from an emissions reduction perspective?
I think it's very important. As Jon said, multi-CDN is not about deploying more CDN. It's really effectively about using your resources better, using them fuller, and making sure those resources are optimized and busy. And so really, within the SVA, we're a big believer in multi-CDN, and we're a big believer in this whole process of open caching. And so effectively what open caching allows you to do is to actually define a hierarchy of really interconnected caches. They're all connected through a set of standardized open API sets, and allows different caches within either a public network or an operator network and different tiers within the operator network to actually do things like expose their capacity to make that capacity available to content owners and allow them to push content down and begin to actually utilize that. And so effectively, as this capacity is exposed, it can be utilized, and the CDNs or the caches that are actually deployed out there become much, much more efficient. There's a number of APIs that the SVA have defined and are standardizing around this. Configuration interfaces to be able to actually go out and configure the cache a capacity insights interface that allows you to actually see what spur capacity is required. We have a request routing interface to actually allow you to intelligently route content or route content requests between edge nodes. And then things like content management interfaces, so you can actually go and purge content that is no longer being used. And then obviously everybody needs to make money at this, so we really have a logging interface or a set of logging APIs that give you the ability to see what was used, who used what, and then to be able to actually charge or reconcile on the back end really for what people are using. And again, the implementation from that perspective is actually very simple. There's two parts to it. There's the open caching controller, which actually provides the logic and the functions that federate this infrastructure. And then really on all the caches, there's a simple little agent that really exposes APIs out that are actually used by the open caching controller. So it's quite a simple implementation or simple application for someone to actually pick up and begin to run with.
Okay, great. Thanks for this in-depth view. Jon, from your discussions with the key PayTV operators and telcos you mentioned before, do they also see open caching as one of the important tools in the toolbox to go greener? What's their feedback?
They do. There's a lot of interest that we're hearing from the marketplace relative to open caching, and looking at it really to monetize really the last mile of their network in a way that allows them to utilize more of their capacity than they have the ability to do on their own. For example, by exposing those open caching scenarios and making that cache available to over-the-top providers, they ultimately can promise to the market that they're able to deliver with higher quality at a lower cost. But at the end of the day, they're also utilizing their resources more fully, which at the end reduces the amount of waste on their network and is key to driving a more sustainable and higher utilized CDN. Okay,
good. I want to come back to something you said before, Jon. You mentioned hybrid cloud. Yeah? So we talked about multi-CDN, we talked about the open caching. Now let's go to hybrid cloud. Quick reminder maybe for the audience, just 2-3 sentences, Jon. What is hybrid cloud? Why is it important? And then, of course, how does that contribute to energy efficiency?
Sure. So hybrid cloud is an architecture that combines both on-premise and cloud-based processing. And with the CDN, it allows an operator to create a more efficient content delivery by using the on-premise CDN for their day-to-day core streaming, and then using the cloud CDN for traffic bursts. So those events that drive a spike in usage and allows you to not have to provision that on-network caching because you have this cloud-based solution for the bursting capacity. And those cloud-based systems can be spun up and spun down on demand only when needed. So this will allow operators to control a hybrid network that ultimately is a much more useful way of delivering efficiently without a lot of waste on their deployment.
Okay. And Brian, from your view, hybrid cloud CDN and from the view of the SVTA, what do you see? Do you maybe have some interesting use cases from some of your members or some of the people that you work with?
So we do. So there are a number of the larger cloud providers that are actually members of the SVTA. And certainly from a lot of the prototypes and the work that we're doing, we're definitely seeing this infrastructure being pushed deeper and deeper into operator networks. And so once that's in place, someone like a Velocix can actually deploy their applications on there and allow them really to sort of scale at will, so as required. And so not only are we seeing sort of private CDN sit within the operator network now, we're actually seeing CDN sit on this public cloud infrastructure that really is very elastic, and allows the service to scale really, really well. And, even if you think about how these infrastructures are being deployed, you have the regional cloud, right down through mid-tier cloud, right down to the operator edge, all consolidated really as a VPC, so a virtual private cloud. So it really does allow for you to do some things with interesting things with routing. So particularly sort of in the mobile world, if you connect to a network edge, you may not be able to be forwarded to another network edge because you're obviously not within range of those caches. So having this full, cloud stack, this virtual public cloud, it now allows you to actually scale up. So there's really no interruption in service if you can't be serviced from the edge, and you can, take a little bit of latency. It allows you really to scale up within that cloud stack to begin consuming content there. It also does things like to be, allow you to deploy your content more efficiently. So very popular content can be pushed right down at the edge. Long tail content can really begin now to sit in these mid tiers and redirect the users to them. So it becomes a very, very efficient way to actually use content. The other thing about the edge of the network is that, it's definitely really real estate constrained. And so when you do have these public cloud providers deploying there, that infrastructure is going to be shared. And it may be shared between CDN, it may be shared between, smart meters, utilities, et cetera. And so, as Jon was mentioning, when you have this ability to spin up stuff really on demand, peak times for streaming, say between 7 p.m. and midnight, you may want to dedicate that infrastructure really to delivering content and getting a great quality of experience. Between, say, 3 and 4 a.m., when not many people are streaming, that hardware can actually be re-provisioned to run inference on smart meters, smart utilities, and all these other applications that are actually contributing back to the network.
Okay. So we talked about architectures. What are the right ones? Multi-CDN, hybrid cloud. We talked about how to measure the energy efficiency with analytics. We covered caches. Apropos caches, Brian, are the caches already super efficient, or is there still a way to go? Is there another 5%, or you think there's still some large improvement to be made on caches?
So I think it depends. Certainly within the SVA, we run a lot of POCs and proof of concepts, prototypes, that kind of thing. And we generally take something like, Lightspeed, or we'll take Nginx and really deploy them. And within the SVA, we typically scale those things through brute force. So for example, we just throw hardware at it, really to get the capacity that we need. Really as an operator, or as a content owner, that's really not something that you want to do. So I think those caches can actually be improved a great deal. And if you look at, and maybe Jon could talk a little bit better about this, but if you look at how, for example, the Velocix cache is built, it's basically content aware, it's network aware. They have popularity-based caching. And so all of those algorithms really go a long way to make sure that the right content is really sitting on the cache as and when it's needed. And by driving cache efficiency like that from, say, 5% up to maybe 70, 80, 90%, it does make a huge difference really when you come to utilization of that cache and greening the whole ecosystem.
Okay, so Jon, Brian did the nice pass to you. Tell us, how can we optimize caching?
Absolutely. So yeah, the real important part in terms of driving cache efficiency is being able to analyze the data across the CDN and looking at the tiers that exist within a CDN to boost effectively memory and the cache hit rates. So we use this data and the analysis to make smarter decisions regarding what content to cache at which level. At Velocix, we call this hi-fi caching, and it's a way of optimizing streaming efficiency and reducing the overall energy consumption. And we actually hold a patent on this, and we believe it's one advantage we can bring to bear to make CDNs more eco-friendly.
Okay. Good. So, dear audience, by the way, if you have questions, I see we already have a few. If you have questions, send us them at any time. We'll get to them in a bit. We're not yet there, so audience Q&A is coming in a bit. We'll have one more topic because we said we wanted to also speak about upstream technologies. So, what are the potential efficiency gains on upstream technologies? What would it be? Where would you start? And Jon, yeah, maybe you start with your thoughts on where is there something to be done on getting greener?
Sure. There's a couple of areas in this, and really it's around the kinds of technologies that are available to help an operator get more utilization out of their network. And so one is with multi-tenant applications, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And secondly, it's like, what other technologies are there that can help in driving sustainability? So I think the first part, when we look at multi-tenant video applications, these are really important. It allows us to simply share common infrastructure to reduce the overall processing footprint, something Brian was already touching on before. As an example of that, we have a cloud-based video recording solution that operates across multiple regional properties, and it uses a single cloud instance for that purpose. At the end of the day, this reduces the carbon footprint while also streamlining commissioning and maintenance and costs relative to the deployment. So when we look at it, multi-tenancy applications really are a win-win for operators. Secondly, when we look at the other types of technologies that we can use to optimize across a footprint, there's a number of optimizations that can with storage. So tiering storage based upon popularity is key. Using memory for high popularity content is important, while moving that low demand content to power hungry disks is more appropriate. So you can adjust how you move the content around based upon its popularity, but you can also adjust how you manage the drives within a server to ensure that the fewest number of drives are spinning at any particular time. So there's looking at tiered storage, looking at how you optimize memory, how you manage the disks themselves. All of those will result in a greener footprint. Also, when we look at compression, other compression technologies can save on storage and space. We can support operations like on-demand transcoding. So at the end of the day, you don't have to store as many numbers of content profiles, and you can transcode on demand to support multiple devices. So a number of different ways of focusing on optimizing the technology footprint for reducing energy consumption and load.
Okay, so multi-tenant cloud solutions as a key element for that. Brian, anything to add from your side, either on multi-tenant cloud solutions or on other upstream technologies?
No, I think multi-tenant, particularly when you're serving smaller customers, really does make a lot of sense from the application perspective. But the other thing that, when we talk about multi-tenancy, there's multi-tenancy really on the infrastructure as well. And so effectively, you now have a lot of these applications sharing the same physical infrastructure. And at the back end, they're now beginning to look at shared big data services. Fewer vendors are writing their own analytics. They're not writing their own security. They're not writing their own control planes. They're going to a cloud vendor and really taking a lot of that stuff. And so effectively, you have one set of applications really running across the ecosystem to sort of manage that stuff. And it scales really, really well. And for CDN vendors and encoder vendors, et cetera, it really allows them to sort of focus on what they do well. I mean, their secret sauce is really in those applications that they're delivering. So being able to actually utilize these big data applications really does make a lot of sense. And we're already beginning to see that within 5G. And I think I mentioned the 5G self-organizing stuff before. But effectively, when you begin to look at MEC and whichever flavor you happen to sort of embrace, you actually begin to see that a lot of these deployment environments are actually very small. And so to have everyone deploy their entire ecosystem on it really doesn't make a lot of sense. So just take that cache, deploy it there, but leverage a lot of the components that the operators are bringing to you.
Okay, so we're coming to the end, but before we'll of course do some Q&A, and we have a few questions. And first one, I think is for Jon or both of you. Which of the streaming technologies we just highlighted in the course of the last 40 minutes do you think is if you pick one, what is the most important one to address making streaming greener?
Sure.
Jon, you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll start with that. As the CDN product manager at Velocix, I'm very much focused on hybrid cloud solutions relative to CDN. We see that as being critical relative to allowing operators to really change their capacity planning and taking advantage of bursting traffic to on-demand resources in the cloud and supporting those advanced routing and analytics requirements that enable that infrastructure. So for me and my prioritization, that's top of the list.
Okay, and Brian, for you?
Yeah, and I think, if I were to put my SVTA hat on, it's really not about deploying more caching. It's really making utilization of those caches more efficient. And, as Jon said, there are a number of different ways to do that. Clearly within the SVTA, we've been looking at some time in terms of exposing cache functionality out to end users so they can actually know what's available and actually begin to sort of pick that up and use it. And I think, as you begin to sort of, on boxes that today are maybe 20 or 30% loaded, as you begin to deploy more and more of these technologies, these intelligent routing technologies, the open caching technologies, and be able to put content on the boxes and route people to those boxes and actually optimize those boxes, I think that's where we're really going to see the big benefits for greening up this industry.
Okay, so no one size fits all. And a few more questions here. I'll just read it. Shall we overall expect an energy decrease of video consumption with MIBR, better codecs and other streaming developments, or rather an increase as more traditional linear DVB-CTS customers will increasingly adopt streaming interactive video services? Also, what is the role of DVB-I and 5G broadcast in this context? So, do we expect overall a decrease of video consumption with multicast ABR and better codecs and the DVB-I and 5G elements? So, I don't know, who wants to take it?
I can start with MABR and BBR congestion control technologies. So MABR is interesting. It certainly, when deployed, can reduce load across a network infrastructure. But in all honesty, it's been a slowly developing marketplace for MABR, and I think there's some complicating factors in that solution. In that, any of the use cases that drives to a unicast solution around personalization, time shifting, pausing live, anything like that, disrupts that efficiency. And there's a general need to manage the client stack and compatibility when it comes to MABR. And both of those have really gotten in the way in wide deployments of MABR. But as a technology, it certainly reduces load on the network. So don't write it off, but it's been slow developing. When it comes to BBR and congestion controls on the network, it's not a video specific technology. It certainly spans all sorts of web traffic, but it certainly is something that is going to drive greater efficiency, we believe, across the network. And as we make gains relative to our entire ecosystem and support for those types of 5G technologies that are built into some of the underlying infrastructure that we use, we can begin to take advantage of those types of solutions in our footprint. I don't know, Brian, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I absolutely agree. I mean, I think new technologies such as BBR and PCC really do make a lot of sense to be able to optimize the network piece. I think a lot of the challenge, though, is that you need to now begin looking at these ecosystems really holistically. And so not only are you dealing with the video people, you really need to get the network people involved, and you really need to begin building these things out really with a complete overview of really what's happening as part of these delivery ecosystems. I do agree with multicast, what you said about multicast ABR. You know, I really don't think it's really interesting technology. I worked on the initial implementation or the initial spec from Cable Labs. The ecosystem really didn't seem to evolve to support it. And so I think the biggest challenges out there is there's really no devices that will give you the ability to pull these streams down and be able to sort of process them and render them. So I think that's really the biggest challenge with multicast ABR. And, you know, clearly things like eMBMS and FEMBMS have not gone away. You know, there's a new iteration of that for 5G. I think one of the biggest changes, and I think one of the things that's probably going to benefit it, is that you really don't need a device with a SIM card in anymore to actually pull FEMBMS. That can be broadcast from any high TAR antenna. And basically, if you have a 5G receiver in your device, you can actually get that and you can sort of pull it in. So it now does give you the ability to deploy other kinds of devices other than phones to begin to utilize this technology.
Yeah. Talking about devices, there was another question. I mean, when with no standards, 4K, 8K, we will see new devices, whether that's a set-top box, a TV, or whatever. I mean, that's not part of this panel to look at the footprint of manufacturing new devices, which of course is bad. The best device, the greenest device is the device that's not being built. But let's talk about 4K, 8K, whatever is coming after. Do we see enough advances in compression technologies that will offset that? We need new devices, but now we can also more data hungry formats. We can still offset it with counterbalancing it with the right encoding and compression. Is that coming, or what do you see?
I'm not an expert in where that's going, so I wouldn't say I'm the right person to answer. I know, Brian, do you have a comment?
So definitely, as you begin to push the bit rate and push the resolution on this content, you know, obviously these files, the streams, everything about it will get bigger and bigger. And clearly, you know, when you're looking at new encoding technologies such as 266 and other things that are being developed at the minute, it should actually go a long way to alleviate that. In terms of the streaming environment, though, and a lot of the work that we're doing within the SVA, when we're looking at immersive video, a lot of that, or a small portion of that, really comes down to delivering that video stream. A lot of it is simply being data that's delivered, and that's actually being pushed into the GPUs, so the vertex shader and the fragment shader within the GPU are taking this data and actually using that to generate a lot of the environment that goes around the video. And the nice thing about that is that data tends to be very, very small. It's really just arrays and indexes, really just defining coordinates really within the screen. And the colors that go with those coordinates are the textures that are downloaded with it. So this sort of immersive, you know, really for world where you're now delivering 4K or 8K video, it only becomes a part of that. And the rest of it becomes actually rendered directly on the device itself. And, you know, to give you an example, I mean, even an iPhone today, you know, is really capable of rendering probably up to sort of 4,000 objects really within the shaders that are available within that device. So most of the devices out there can sort of natively support this. So I think when you begin to look at this convergence of technologies, you know, and as video really becomes a part of the overall experience that you're having, there's a lot of optimizations can really be had there by simply passing data down to the device and not the full rendered video stream.
Good. Thank you for the answers. Thank you, dear audience, for sending us the questions, and thank you for being here today. We had strong competition. Netherlands played Qatar while we were here. Great to have you. We're at the end of this discussion. I want to thank really Brian and Jon. Great to have you here, to have had you here today. Thanks for your insights. Dear audience, if you have questions, you can send them. We have one slide with an email address here, jonanderson@velocix.com. If you have questions to Brian, you can also send it to Jon and we'll forward it. Otherwise, he will be too busy answering all your questions and not do any work for the SVTA anymore. We don't want that. So please send it to Jon. It was a pleasure to have you guys. Big applause to you. Really great insights. Thank you for being here. I don't say Merry Christmas yet because there will be another session that we'll do, at least in this series with Velocix before Christmas. Stay tuned. Enjoy the World Cup. Have a great morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. Thank you for being with us. Bye, Jon. Bye, Brian. Bye, dear audience.
Goodbye. Bye.
Bye.